Welcome back to another episode of the Max Stern Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch. And today we are kind of continuing our offseason wrap up. And this is a little bit more of a look ahead. Teams that still have a little bit of work to be done. So if you missed our last episode, that's been available. We did basically a wrap up of the free agent signings, how we thought teams have done up until the point of recording that episode. And then this one, again, is kind of more of a look ahead. So we appreciate you subscribing. Max Stern Podcast available on pretty much all major podcast platforms. Our content's available at AFP Analytics on X. And I don't know what more we'll kind of say. I guess we're not going to break any news in this episode necessarily, unless there is something to add, but I don't think I can give any inside information so much in this episode because these are things that haven't happened yet. In the last episode, I shed a little light on Chris Tanov's situation. Anyways, so I think we'll get into it. So these are the teams that we kind of consider still have either one or two maybe smaller things to do or still have some major questions surrounding them. So wide range on the spectrum here. If you listen to our last episode, we kind of highlighted teams we were going to talk about. So if you didn't listen to it, you should maybe go back and listen to that first and then get into this episode. Or I think you'll be fine following blindly too. I think you'll figure out where we're going with most of these teams very quickly as well. So basically these are teams that we feel like haven't done enough for the offseason or still some big questions to address. So let's start with a very simple one in the fact that they haven't done much this offseason, but I don't know how much more they can do, but maybe they should do more. The New York Islanders have brought in Anthony Duclair. That's it.
Well, they kept Mike Riley.
Okay. They did that too.
Analytic darling, Mike Riley. So they have like no cap space right now.
Correct.
Supposedly rumors around them maybe looking to move Peugeot. To me, this is just kind of a more of the same team, and that's not a good thing. Defensively, last year, I don't think they were as good as they generally are. I would almost expect maybe a little bit of a rebound there. I like Duclair as a player. I think he's a little different than everyone that they have. So that's a plus. I could even see like Duclair and Barzal being a really good fit potentially. Just speed. But in general, like they just kind of need a little more firepower, but it's tough to see it if they can't move someone like a Peugeot.
So, yeah, as you said, their problem is cap space, really.
Yep.
They don't have any, like, horrible contracts, but they don't have a lot of good contracts.
Well,
Peugeot's close to horrible, but they're paying a lot of middle six players like middle six players.
Well, so there's players that teams would want. So like a Kyle Palmieri, he just scored 40 goals.
Yeah.
And he's got 1 year left on his contract. Plenty of teams would line up. But that's exactly what you're looking to acquire, not part with. Anders Lee, I'm sure teams would be interested, but one, he's your captain, and two, he's providing good play. So like you're subtracting from the wrong spot probably there. And you can go around the roster and kind of start saying the same thing. So Peugeot's like the obvious one to move on from. It's just not easy to do.
Yeah. Lee, as you mentioned, Anders Lee, probably the most movable asset because he doesn't have the trade protection. He's still good, and he's on a relatively fine contract for the level of, like, the performance level.
There's not a ton of term left there, I don't believe.
It still is a couple left. Yeah.
2 years, I think.
2-3 years
2 or 3
left. Yeah.
Which isn't
fact.
insignificant, but it's not a huge long-term deal that a team's taking on. So I don't know. Pajot is the obvious one. Everyone else, there's kind of a reason to say, well, wait, we don't really want to move that player. I don't know. They need more firepower. They need more offense. At the same time, I also sort of wonder if it's just a play style issue, because they do have some names on this team who are capable of scoring: Brock Nelson, Kyle Palmieri, Barzal, Bo Horvat, like Lee. They've got guys who can score goals. So, like, what exactly is the issue here? It might just be play style, which that's not a cap issue. That's a philosophy issue. I don't know.
Just for clarity, Anders Lee this year and one more after this. So there would be a lot of teams that would be interested in acquiring him if he were available. But again, that's not really, the Islanders aren't going to win a hockey trade by sending him out, because then they're going to need to replace him.
Yeah.
And players who bring what Anders Lee does, big power forwards who are really good in front of the net, don't grow on trees.
No.
A lot of teams are looking for those type of players. So if you move him out, good luck kind of replacing him. So it might be a different story if his performance has dropped off, but his performance is still at a very high level for a 34-year-old player.
Yeah, so I think, I guess to wrap up the Islanders, it's like they just need a little bit more. They don't have cap space. Even if they did, is it really a player issue, or is it just the way the team plays, a style issue? That could be the case. So Islanders are kind of like, I would say they're fine, but like they're very status quo. They could end up making the playoffs. They might just miss it. Same old.
Basically, making a trade would be hard unless they can move Pajot. It would be hard to have a net positive result.
Yeah. Yep.
Another team very close to the cap maybe could have one or two things still up their sleeve. I mean, well, this team always does have something up their sleeve. It seems like Vegas always seems to have something up their sleeve, but there's probably something still to be done. I look on defense. We had talked about it a couple months ago at this point. We had talked about who might be available via trade, and Shea Theodore was a name that we had thrown out there. The other name that we had thrown out at the time was Logan Thompson. He's already been moved. So Shea Theodore, maybe like a William Karlsson, could also be. Vegas now has a lot of centers with Eichel, Hurdle, Karlsson, and Nick Roy. So maybe something gives there. I would imagine Karlsson could be the name, but Karlsson and Theodore at this point, if would be moves to clear some cap space, while also maybe improving other spots in their lineup.
Yeah, so I would say, looking at the defensemen, the big thing is they've got a real good, I would say, top 8 defensemen in general. Noah Hannafin, Pietrangelo, McNabb, Theodore, Haig, Whitecloud, Korzak, and Ben Hutton, I believe. So Korzak should be in the starting lineup probably. It just might not be, because that's a good defensive group. Theodore being 1 year away from free agency next offseason, that is why he was kind of the obvious one to us. McNabb is too. You could wonder about the future of a Nick Hague if he gets a new contract, or if he could be a trade piece. Theodore would get you the most back, but really, I kind of look at Theodore, McNabb, and Hague as like, you could try and turn one of them into a forward of a different variety of levels there. And looking at their forward group, they could kind of use it. If they could get a top 6 forward for Theodore, that would be great. But even if it wasn't Theodore and they decided McNabb and it's more of just a third line guy, like that could be useful to them still. They could use it. So I think, for me, I think this is what you were getting at too, is could they turn a defenseman into a forward and just kind of help balance the lineup a little bit and have stronger depth up front? That's what I would like to see.
Potentially maybe get a little more cap space in the process to maybe make an in-season move or have a little bit more flexibility. I would say the three names, I don't disagree, but I think with the addition of Hannafin and having him locked up long-term, I think you're looking more from just a play style perspective at a Theodore or a Haig. I think McNabb brings a different element to their blue line.
Yes.
Especially on the contract he's on. Like, you would have plenty of suitors for Braden McNabb. I think just how the roster's constructed at this point, Theodore or Haig would make more sense to move than a McNabb. But
yep.
So that's probably what Vegas could do, or they could just roll with what they have and make their in-season blockbuster deal like they always do.
The last big thing with Vegas, how healthy is Mark Stone?
That's always the question. I'm going to guess he gets an injury around January or February. That will be a 2 to 3 month time frame.
So I will say going into the season, throughout the first half of the season, if he's not healthy then, I think that would, or I guess going into the season, so right now, if you think health is definitely going to be an issue, that would make a potential trade for a forward even more important. I think it would go from it'd be nice to do that to like you have to do that if you're Vegas.
So I think I'll throw one connection that I think there's been a little smoke around. Would you do Marner at 50% for Theodore straight up? Who says no in that trade?
Toronto.
But it's probably close. It's probably close.
I think the issue for Toronto as a team is ultimately up front, they are not as strong as they were last year. They kept Domi, they lost Bertuzzi. So if you move Marner and you retain, so you ultimately limit yourself from using all of Marner's cap hit on other players, and you only address the defense, you are taking another step and really a much bigger step down at forward. I think that would be very bad.
Okay, let me expand it a little bit. Theodore Carlson for Marner.
I think that would make way more sense. If I'm Toronto, like that's a deal I need to be okay with.
So, there's been a little smoke around that idea. Vegas gets their high-end forward. That would work pretty well for Toronto as well. They fill out some depth and actually get a very good defenseman in the process. So, maybe Toronto's had some interest in offensive kind of producing defenseman Brandon Montour in free agency. Maybe Shea Theodore maybe one of the reasons that didn't ultimately get done is they have Shea Theodore on their radar. I don't know. I'm just speculating because that had been out there a little bit as well.
Toronto, I think, could justify the addition of Theodore. Simon Benoit is, I think, currently penciled into their bottom pair, which he was good last year. I think you could justify having him as your seventh and having Theodore. I mean, I guess if you're going to bring in someone like Theodore, it's very justifiable for Benoit to be seven.
Let's see. So how about let's stick with the theme of cap space being an issue.
Okay.
Colorado Avalanche.
Oh, yeah.
So they've had a good offseason so far with Jonathan Drouin. They got him to come back on a very team-friendly contract. Not going to knock the player for doing that whatsoever, but it definitely was a team-friendly contract.
Yeah.
And then Eric Brandstrom, Calvin DeHaan, good value additions. Parker Kelly for their depth, fine.
Fourth line, yeah.
But Gabe Landeskog, that's a question mark. Is he going to be healthy enough to play? Val Nichushkin is going to be suspended for a couple months still.
At least
Under the player assistance program. So if Landeskog isn't healthy, his contract can go on long-term injured reserve. Nichushkin his contract will not count against the cap while he's suspended. But right now he's slated to be back mid-season, which means that Colorado can't freely use Nichushkin's cap space. Landeskog, I think there's a little bit more of a question about, but if he's going to be back at any point, you can't freely use his cap space.
Which they might have a better idea about Landeskog than Nichushkin.
They should.
Yes, they should.
Well, I mean, in theory, they should have a better idea about Nichushkin because it should be a hard deadline, but it's not that simple.
No.
So they right now don't have a full roster, and they don't have more cap space. And they need some depth up front still.
So that's the thing, is their fourth line. I think you'd be fine with Kelly on your fourth line, but I think as of now they might be looking at guys like a Chris Wagner, Joel Kiviranta, which those are usually like the extra forwards pretty much. Come in when someone's injured, maybe just switch things up for a game, but they're usually extras. So, yeah, they really need some depth. And honestly, like, I don't think it's a ton. What they need to do up front should not cost a ton of cap space, really. So if there's a little bit of wiggle room that they can work with, they might be able to bring in some cheaper quality options. The issue is at this point in free agency, there's not a ton out there still, but I look at someone like someone who is still out there, James Van Riemsdyk, that if he'd be willing to take a very cheap deal like he did with Boston, like that might be the type of thing that Colorado needs to look for as far as filling out the bottom of the roster at a very low cost. Otherwise, it might be they need to ship someone out, which I think there were rumors about Ross Colton. But where that gets tough is you start to take away from what you need to improve.
Josh Manson was the other popular name where there's a little smoke around. I think that would be a little bit more realistic from a roster construction standpoint, but it's not ideal.
The issue there is then you're putting really either DeHaan or Brandstrom on your second pair, which Brandstrom maybe. He hasn't done it yet. He's probably looking for that opportunity. DeHaan's a good bottom pair guy, but
the other issue is then you'd have exactly one right shot defenseman too.
Yeah,
that's Cal McCarr.
Yeah.
The other thing I do wanna at forward, let's assume no Landeskog, no Nichushkin right now. McKinnon, Rantanen, Middlestat, Lehkonen, Drouin. That's 5 names. Those are all top 6 players. I'm struggling to get to a 6th without a Nichushkin or Landeskog.
Yeah.
And it's understandable that because that's 2 top 6 players that I'm omitting here, but this is kind of how dire the forward situation potentially is. I mean, you have Nathan McKinnon, who's going to drive a first line no matter what, and Casey Middlestat's a very good 2C. But there's a hole somewhere, and I don't know who's filling that right now.
Yeah, and I think I do want to touch on, kind of point out, it is not often that 2 top 6 players who are paid like this, both somewhat out of nowhere, all of a sudden not available. So I don't think it was really a poor roster decision with either of them to have them on these contracts. It's just making things very tough now.
Yeah.
Which I will say there's enough high-end talent on this team that they will tread water, and I think they'll be in playoff contention still. Let's say they make the playoffs. If Landeskog and Nichushkin aren't there, they're not going to get very far. It's going to be tough. They're pretty much going to need McKinnon to take over and be the best player in the world.
I would even go as far as if they're not going to have Landeskog or Nichushkin for the entire season. They'll probably make the playoffs, but like I don't even think that's a guarantee. I think they can stay close enough in contention for a while, but it's not necessarily through the fault of management or anything like that they have an issue at forward. And let's not also ignore their goalies are still Alex Georgiev and Justin Anonin. I think I got that right. Anunin.
I think it might be a Noonan. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's questionable in goal. Yeah.
So there's a big question at forward. Questions in goal. Their defense is still very good. But if that's where they have to subtract money from to add elsewhere, then there's questions there. So really Colorado needs probably another player up front. Well, really what they need is Gabe Landeskog to probably be healthy and play like Gabe Landeskog in the past. But that, I don't know if that feels like a level of a long shot.
At this point in the offseason, what's left in free agency might not be as expensive as we once thought.
You go, as you mentioned, JVR cheap.
Yep.
Plug him in because he's at least a middle six player, and then you move one guy up and you're probably okay. Like Logan O'Connor was really good for a while with Colorado, but there's injury questions there. Like I hope he's back healthy because he was really good. And that could be the answer.
Yeah, and there's some other names where they could randomly sign him and be like, I forgot that guy was out there. Tyler Johnson, Max Pacioretty, Kyler Yamamoto, like some names that have kind of drifted off a little bit in recent years, but maybe they end up being useful on a third line for Colorado. We'll see. But their depth up front is very questionable. Their goalies are a little questionable, but their hands might be tied.
Should we stick with that theme? Hands tied, close to cap, probably need some improvement.
Yeah.
Well, we got the Penguins and we have the Rangers. Where should we start of those two?
We're going to start with the Rangers because they acquired someone from the Penguins. I don't know why that matters, but that's what we're going to do. So the Rangers, they acquired Riley Smith. Probably I don't know if I would even say middle six winger, probably a third line winger at this point. And that's really been the Rangers' big move. Sam Carrick was brought in for the fourth line. Benoit Olivier Gruel, fourth line / depth. They got Capo Caco and Braden Schneider signed. They have supposedly been trying to trade Jacob Trouba and have failed.
Kind of did Barclay Goodrow a little dirty.
Yep.
Put him on waivers for San Jose to claim after
The Rangers, they have some space to work with still.
Kind of.
But what's left out there, not a ton.
Well, they also have Ryan Lindgren, who still needs a contract.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so they don't have a lot of really space to work with. Okay, so big thing with them has been really scoring for a while. Last year, it was almost less scoring specifically and more just their 5v5 play was brutal. Smith maybe could help that. I would still say top 9 forward would be ideal to add, if not top 6 winger.
I look at their roster and think they need a top 6 player.
I think ideally they need a top 6 player, because then you're talking either Smith or Kakko is in the top 6, and that's an issue.
I mean, their biggest underlying issue that they can't fix this offseason is I still don't see a 1C on their roster, a true 1C on their roster. That's not fixable this offseason.
No.
They have now 2 solid wingers in Panarin, and Alexis Lafreniere took a massive step forward. But Kreider's getting a little bit older, and then it drops off pretty quickly. So Zibanejad and Trocheck at center, both are probably should be second line on good teams. Even Trocheck on a third line on a really good team would probably be ideal, and that's nothing against the player. Zibanejad definitely should be a 2C at this point.
Yeah.
But that is what it is. They're not going out and finding a 1C somewhere.
No.
So I think getting another winger so that way it can be Panarin, Lafreniere, Kreider, player X. That if that's a true top 6 winger, you feel a little bit better about the forward group, I think.
Yeah, I think it also makes the fit of Riley Smith a bit better.
Yeah.
Where he slots in much more easily on the third line. Yeah, I think they're fine in goal. In general, they're fine on defense. Trouba is not going to live up to his cap hit.
No.
He was hurt for a lot of last season. And, I mean, he downplayed it in interviews and stuff. It was known he was hurt for a while. I don't think if he is healthy, I don't think he'll be as bad as he was. Yet he's still not going to live up to $8 million, which is fine if Fox is healthy and Keandre Miller's still doing his thing and Ryan Lindgren gets healthy, because he was good when he was healthy. I don't remember the specific injuries, but I know he was very banged up in the playoffs and he wasn't as good. In general, they should be fine on defense.
Yeah.
It's really up front that they could use really one more piece.
Yeah, so moving Trouba's salary is the obvious thing. I don't know if moving him at 50%, it's helping, but it's not as much of a net positive as I think might be perceived, because you're not getting a top 6 forward back for Jacob Trouba even at 50%.
No, but just that money may allow you to now add that top 6.
Potentially.
So I think they have right around $5 million right now to work with,
not including a Lindgren extension. So yes.
So let's say they sign him, and I guess we'll ballpark it and say that leaves them with $1 million to $1.5 million, somewhere in there. If you can move Trouba 50%, it goes back up to the 5, and you can go find a top 6 winger.
Yeah.
So like it's pretty much Lindgren needs to get done, and if they want to make another move, they have to free up cap space somewhere, which maybe that's why Lindgren isn't done yet.
Potentially.
It may be Trouba gone or Lindgren gone.
So let me just I kind of was going to lead into a bigger point on Trouba. So trading him 50% retained, yeah, you might be able to get your top 6. So I'm a numbers guy, but you can't tell me that the players in that locker room, when you already kind of did one of your leaders a little dirty in Barclay Goodrow by basically cutthroat putting him on waivers so you can get rid of his contract, and then doing your captain kind of dirty too. Like, if he's traded, it's because they've twisted his arm enough to get him to waive his no trade clause that he has rightfully earned and negotiated in his contract. There's a point where you start to look around if you're a player in that locker room or if you're a player that's thinking of coming into that organization, and you're like there's some questions if you start to kind of ship two who were leader guys out in very not great circumstances that I think could have some unintended mental ripple effects on that team.
Here is my issue with that, and it's probably not what you think I'm about to say. If there is going to be any of that sentiment in that locker room or from players around the league, it's already there. Whether Trouba gets traded or not, just the whole Trouba situation in general and Goudreau put together, doesn't matter whether Trouba gets traded. It's there already. There's already players thinking that. So pretty much you ask your captain who wanted New York Rangers. That was the team he wanted to go to. He signs long-term. He ends up being your captain. You're going to ruffle feathers there. And as soon as you do it, there's no going back from that. It happened. It's not the same exact situation, but you hear the interviews from Steven Stamkos about leaving Tampa, and he talked about how last offseason thinking, all right, extension time, Tampa wasn't anywhere to be found for those conversations. And it sticks with you, and you start thinking about it. These are things like it's already at that level. It doesn't matter if Trouba gets traded or not.
And maybe it is already. No one's really signed with the team yet. They haven't brought any really outside guys in.
Well, so that could be impacting it, but at the same time, their cap situation, they can't really do anything yet. Something has to give with probably Trouba or Lindgren.
Yeah. I do know that there was a consideration of a veteran player that chose elsewhere. I don't know if it was for other reasons or not, but I do know there's interest in a veteran player, and player chose elsewhere. I don't know the motivation necessarily, but it's not like last offseason they had like Blake Wheeler lining up to sign a cheap contract. They haven't had that this offseason. That and again, is it where they are cap wise, or is there like maybe a little bit of a sour taste in players' mouths now with the organization? I don't know.
I'd say that could still be out there for all we know, because maybe if they can't move Trouba and they are keeping Lindgren, then maybe they're looking at throw him out again, James Van Riemsdyk.
Correct. Yeah.
They could make that work probably, but maybe the preference is move Trouba, and it's not James Van Riemsdyk. It's a Frank Vetrano, or maybe they're looking at somehow fitting Zegras or Ehlers, or just shooting a little higher up on the list. So I don't know. The big thing there is watch the two defensemen, Trouba and Lindgren. Once there's some type of decision there, hopefully it leads to them strengthening their forward group somehow, whether it's a big addition or a small free agent signing.
So Pittsburgh will do next.
Yep. So
brought in Kevin Hayes. Which is fine. Fine for
actually,
as a 3C. Actually, I'd say good.
I'm going to say that was very good because they got a second-round pick for taking on Kevin Hayes.
Oh, did they? I didn't even know.
They gave up future considerations.
Okay, so yes,
for Kevin Hayes in a second.
That's a very good addition.
I would have just traded for Kevin Hayes. So
I might have given up a second-round pick for Kevin Hayes. I don't know quite that much, but
I don't know the motive from St. Louis's side of moving him. He did have some trade protection, so maybe that made things tough, but solid 3C, good third line player. That's a good deal for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that, and even moving out Riley Smith was fine.
Yeah, got a second in 2027.
But
fine. Grzelcyk, as I guess he's not that great at this point. So I
came
guess
in, I think, around where we expected him to.
Yeah.
So
Nedeljkovic back with Jari's fine. Everything else was depth. Blake Lizotte is a fine fourth liner.
Anthony Beauvillier as well
fine. Well, I don't personally really think a great option, but fine for the bottom six, I guess.
It's a better gamble than like.
Yeah, if you're gonna throw darts, that's fine. I'm Sebastian Aho, but the defenseman. Depth for the blue line, fine. I think just what it really comes back to here for Pittsburgh: Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Carlson. The core of this team is getting older every year, and so far this offseason haven't really done much to increase their chances of winning.
No.
Which I don't know. I'm probably reading way too much into this, but the rumored Crosby extension that was supposed to go down July 1st, where is it? Because I like chaos, maybe Sidney Crosby's sitting there like, I would like to keep winning, and I don't know if it's happening in Pittsburgh. That feels very insane, and it's weird to picture him anywhere else. But I just wonder, I don't know. I feel like there is a 99% chance an extension is announced tomorrow. But it's I don't know. It's a team who may be striking out this offseason on keeping their championship window open, potentially.
Their lineup just isn't good. Like, it's just not.
It's players who used to be good.
Yeah.
Ricard Raquel, Beauvillier, Lars Eller. Like, Lars Eller's fine, but I don't know. It's just not.
They have a lot of fine bottom six guys. So really they really need another top six forward.
Yeah. So I like it appeared that Bunting fit, but there's still another top six hole. And I would just say in general, that's a team that, again, when you have Crosby, Malkin, Carlson, Letang, if your goal is to keep those guys around and win, trade your draft picks.
Yep.
Whatever value you have in prospects, which really isn't much for Pittsburgh, be willing to use them. It could get to a point where it's not very comfortable in the future as the older veteran core pieces retire or significantly decline. But as long as they're around, you are signaling we are trying to win. So let's make some moves that show you are trying to win.
Yeah, I don't think having Owen Pickering or not is going to make or break their window in 4 years. But it could make or break their now window. So
yeah,
and that's not to knock Owen Pickering at all, but
no.
But he's just he's one player where they have 4 superstars right now.
Yep.
So they have a little bit of space to work with, but still not a ton. Still clearly need another scoring winger, I think.
Be the easier option.
So I think that's kind of our very close. Okay, so I think there's a couple other teams that are close to the cap, and I think could still have some moves in them, but they also fit together to talk about together. Philadelphia and Montreal.
Yeah, so these to me are both teams where I think I'm kind of fine that they didn't do a whole lot. My big thing with Philly is to not overreact and add too much. There are some veterans where maybe you could have made trades. You also need teams interested and willing to add. And I think one of the big things is we finally had a good cap increase, but it's the first year of the good cap increase. It's still pretty tough for a lot of teams. So it might not be as easy as we were thinking it would be a couple months ago. But like Philly with a Scott Lawton, like that's been a rumor for the past couple of years. That should have happened already.
I'd say lesser extent in that. So Lawton's been the very popular name thrown around from Philadelphia, but looking at the forwards in particular, I'll start there as potential. There's been a level of smoke around their names. Joel Farabee, Noah Cates, Morgan Frost, in addition to your mentioned Scott Lawton. That's 4 guys that have been. There's been smoke around them for years with an S, like plural.
Which is almost weird because they are young players who are
outside of Lawton, yeah.
Well, yeah, but those 3 extra ones you mentioned. I think it's just trying to figure out like who's part of your core moving forward. That might be the big thing to watch the rest of the offseason with them, honestly, is what happens there.
Yeah.
Because there might not be a whole lot of wiggle room.
I just feel like they need to make some decisions. So I'm not disagreeing. Yeah. It's smart for them to have not overreacted and like went into full let's push it forward type mode. I think they need to start making a decision because sure they could absolutely run it back. Like their roster's fine. They'll probably be in a very similar situation as they were this year, but it's just there's a lot of names that the runway is starting to end or get very close to ending. So Noah Cates, Morgan Frost, who are not far, so you're going to need new contracts next offseason. Still restricted free agents, but both will be a year away from unrestricted free agency. Scott Lawton, he's still got 2 years left. But just eventually some decisions up front are going to have to be made.
Yeah.
And then blue line as well. If they can move Rasmus Ristolainen, they should.
Yeah.
But that might not be as easy. So, I don't know. Philadelphia, to me, they can do nothing, and that's fine. But they might kind of end up in a situation where they've ended with less than optimal results for some pieces of value.
Yeah.
If they continue to kind of sit on them and see where they're going, eventually it's either commit or move on and get some assets to maybe speed up our retool then.
Yeah.
I think the same could be said for Montreal.
Yeah, I think we've kind of been on the same page of the past few seasons. It's what they should be doing, but haven't. At the same time, some of the players on their roster that you would look to move might not be movable. Josh Anderson, Christian Dvorak is not good.
He at least only has a year left on his contract at a
but
cap hit. I mean,
teams may not be interested at that price.
Gallagher is aging.
He's aging. Is he their captain? No, Suzuki's their captain. Okay, so Gallagher's just been around for a while. With defensive, with the defense, Savard maybe you could move. Matheson you could move. I think there's kind of a stuck in the middle a little bit with they wanted to have some good players around their younger talent. But it might be good to move some of these guys eventually. I don't know.
So Savard's, I think, the glaring. I mean, he could be a deadline. You could move him at the deadline, fine, but he's the glaring. Like, he's not part of your long term. This is it with him. This last year. So at some point, you need to get assets there. They would. I think you mentioned the guys that would be good to move, but you're also right. They're not real movable.
Where are we headed from here?
Well, we have some options.
Minnesota
works. They're an option.
So Minnesota's, I think, big thing to throw out there last season of the big cap hits from Parise and Suter. So that kind of limits them a little bit this offseason as far as like how much they can really add. So they brought in Trennan, who is real good defensively, brings a very physical game to the bottom six. To me, I like the player a lot. I think most teams should want him. Feel like might be a little redundant in Minnesota, the play style. And then
you're talking for listeners' sake with Ryan Hartman in particular, but Marcus Foligno.
Types of Hartman, Foligno, even from a defensive standpoint in a way, Eric Seneka, even though he's a little better. But I don't know, it just feels a little like they're bringing in the same type of player that they already have.
And he was one in our projections that was one of the most overpaid in our projections as well. So again, that's not a knock on the player necessarily, but just it's a knock on the team.
And then the other thing with them that's a little interesting is when they brought back Fleury, when they signed him for another season, it was a little odd because you've got Gustafsson and then Wallstedt. Wallstedt's ready, it seems. So I don't know how that really works. Could we see Gustafsson moved in a trade? Maybe. There's not a ton of teams that I think are still like really looking for a goalie at this point in the offseason. I think there's teams that could look at him as an improvement on what they have. So maybe there is a deal there this offseason, but I don't know. I feel like that might be kind of a crowded crease issue.
Yeah, and again, there's a level of like at some point you have. I guess you don't have to make a decision. You could just leave Wallstedt in the AHL for another year, and everyone would then know that next year it's Gustafsson and Wallstedt with Fleury saying that this is his last year. But I don't know. They haven't done enough to improve. Not that they have necessarily the cap space to do much to improve, but I don't know.
The couple of moves that they made, we'll say bringing back Fleury and then Trennan, just kind of where you could argue they were already good. That's where they brought players in.
Yeah,
which is weird. It's fine, but weird use of resources, in my opinion.
So they could still absolutely use another top 6 scoring threat, but again, I don't know where
they really need a center
to come from. Yeah,
but yeah, where?
Yeah, let's stick since a lot of teams do play these teams back to back. Let's do Winnipeg next. So a lot of teams do a Minnesota Winnipeg. So let's do our own Minnesota Winnipeg swing. Winnipeg has had a very, very quiet offseason. Maybe too much so.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna argue with like, okay, Nate Schmidt was on a contract that he was probably not living up to, so buying it out is it's an okay decision. My bigger issue is how they've proceeded since doing that.
Yeah, so defensively, I think they're fine. Without Schmidt, Morrissey, DeMello was brought back, Dylan Sandberg, Neil Pionk, Logan Stanley, Colin Miller. That's fine. They've got a little bit of cap space. Really, some of it there from the Schmidt buyout. Monahan's gone, Toffoli's gone. They could kind of use bringing someone in up front. You've got Ehlers on the trade block, it seems. And if he gets shipped out, then you really are like having issues. Toffoli, Monahan, and Ehlers gone. That would not be good. Your top forward prospect, we'll say, with Perfetti graduated.
Well, and on Perfetti, he needs a new contract still.
He needs a new contract, which you could probably fit
You can fit
short term in right now, but
even a long term would be close. Puckpedia, so that's the website we've been referencing now, with no longer cap friendly being available. Puckpedia has their cap space, $5.8 million. That like you can fit Perfetti in no problem. But then you're running it back as you just laid out.
And if you do end up moving Ehlers, that's an even bigger issue. And then your top prospect, Rutger McGrody, does not want to sign. So it just, McGrody not wanting to be there and him being very much so in trade rumors. Ehlers being in trade rumors, I feel like there's moves still here this offseason. If I'm them, I keep Ehlers. If he leaves after this season, so be it. But you're a team looking to contend. If he's your own rental, that's fine. Go ahead and move McGrody. Good prospect with value. Maybe you can get a top 6 player. Maybe there's a deal with like Anaheim around McGrody. There's a couple players there that could fit into the top 6 for Winnipeg. I don't know, but just Monahan's gone, Toffoli's gone. No one was brought in to replace them. There's holes there.
Yeah, and so basically my issue is let's use this cap space we freed up productively. Because even as you look at their roster now, I'm not sure taking Nate Schmidt out and basically running it back less Nate Schmidt is actually is full on net positive. So you kind of need to use that to bring in a player.
Yeah. I agree.
That's really where I am with them.
Part of that issue might be a good chunk of that cap space going to Perfetti.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
So
they need top 6 help.
Let's stick on the need top 6 help. There's a lot of places I could be going with this. Stick in the Western Conference as well. How about Seattle Kraken?
Okay, Seattle. So as far as trades, they brought in, or didn't bring in, they sent out Brian Dumoulin. Fine, yeah. They brought in Montour on defense, which should be a pretty big help, honestly, for offensive ability on this team.
Fine player contract, we would say is fine based on our market value projections.
Up front is the issue.
And remains the issue.
Yeah, so Chandler Stevenson was the addition, which not a player I would have targeted if I was any team, personally. I think because the issue I think with him is going to be is he put in a role that he shouldn't be put in. And if that's the case, I don't know if you're going to get really what you're hoping for when you sign him to the contract. That's really my ultimate issue. I think for Seattle specifically, when I look at the roster, I see a lot of similar level players. So where like other teams who really had depth issues, let's say a big third line issue or maybe even a spot open on the second line, maybe you justify signing Stevenson. For Seattle, I feel like they just added a lot of what they already had.
My big question here is, you have Jared McCann, if you want to consider him center, he might we can say wing, fine. You have Yanni Gord. Now Chandler Stevenson. What are you doing with Matty Beniers and, more importantly, Shane Wright?
Well, so in theory, they could run Beniers, Stevenson, Gord, Wright down the middle.
That does not sound like a way to use too high. Well, Beniers is first line in your scenario. That does not seem like what you do with your former 4th overall pick, who you really haven't developed properly whatsoever.
Yeah.
So the contract, the Stevenson contract's one thing. It's we had that as an overpay.
Could Stevenson be brought in for the wing somewhere?
That's a lot of money to pay a winger.
Let me go through the lineup really quick because I think it'll make the issue with Wright even more of an issue.
Yep.
This might not be exact, but I'll throw some lines out there. Let's say McMahon, Beniers, Eberle, Schwartz, Stevenson, Burakovsky, Tolvanen, Gord, Bjorkstrand. There's your top 9.
Yeah.
So where does Wright go? 4th line with Brandon Tanev. Like,
yeah.
Or AHL.
Again.
Like it's. I suppose that's a possibility. But
that's probably what's happening.
Yeah.
Because so then Gord has 1 year left. So then there's in theory his spot. But Beniers didn't have a great year last year. And you didn't.
Most of the players on this team.
Well, most of them, which is why there's a new head coach there. But
yeah.
But you're basically running back. Like, you didn't get him help. I guess maybe you got him help in that you have someone to take some deployment away.
Potentially.
In which case, but that's what Gord should have been for to begin with. So you're exactly, like, you started, contract's not great, but it's even more of a problem basically with the team that offered it to him.
Yeah, it's just, I just see very similar levels of play from the majority of this roster. Like,
yes,
there are a lot of top 9 forwards on this team.
I'd say there's a lot of middle 6 forwards.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm more getting at, like, any one of them, if they were the third player on a top line with a couple stars, that's fine.
Yeah.
If Bjorkstrand's paired with Draisaitl and McDavid, you're not batting an eye at it. They could all do it, but when you have 3 of those players all on the top line, like, I don't know. We had said for a while the big thing Seattle needs to do is find elite talent, elite offensive talent. And I think defensively, Montour is as close as you're going to get when you're not producing your own talent that you drafted, pretty much. It's very hard to find those elite offensive guys. So, I mean, the Montour edition brings in something that they needed. I like that. As far as up front at forward, I just see more of the same.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with the Montour edition. I would have rather seen them use that cap space to acquire a forward.
Yeah.
But if that wasn't in the cards for whatever reason,
so
I would have rather them acquired a different forward than the one that they did.
Yeah, well, and again, the issue there is you then go, okay, what forward?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
which, I don't know.
they've also kind of backed themselves into a like $6 million ish, a little bit more than $6 million to get Beniers done. I don't know if they have anyone else outstanding. Beniers is the big one. Beniers is basically it. To get him done, I mean, it can work, but you might be not getting the length that, although I think we've talked about a short-term deal might make sense on all sides there, but you've also kind of backed yourself into that short-term deal to an extent. And again, looking at this lineup, looking at this roster, using up the rest of your cap space on basically Matty Beniers and running it back, it's just not good enough. Seattle's a very middling team. I think the organization's hoping they get back to what they were 2 years ago. I just don't see that happening with everyone getting older. And can I also just like, are we listening to the analytic department here? What's going on? Because especially the Stevenson like contract, I just can't imagine the analytic department that's supposedly built up very robustly with a lot of smart people. I just can't imagine them being on board with this contract. So I have other management questions in Seattle as well. Won't go any farther than that, but just wanted to throw that out there before we move on to another team. Once again, we're going quite long in another episode here. So, how about St. Louis quickly? Another team that probably could use a top 6 forward.
Well, just very stuck in the middle. They're stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
Should try and sell off some aging defensemen, even if you barely get anything for them, just free the cap space, but that hasn't happened. That team is only going to be as good as Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, Pavel Buchnevich, pretty much. They need to be like outstanding for them to be a playoff team. And that might not even be enough.
Detroit.
Don't really know how to feel about them yet because at least as of recording, Seider and Raymond are both not signed.
Yep.
Bringing back Kane, that's fine. Tarasenko, I think in the right role would be fine. Gustafsson is almost like replacing Gostisbehere a little bit. Cam Talbot in goal is okay. I think they're kind of having goalie issues. Husso, I think, had injury issues. Alex Lyon, I think, can be good with the right amount of usage. Their prospects aren't ready yet in goal. It's going to be relatively the same team as last year with Tarasenko and Gustafsson for whatever that is worth. Good players in the right role, but I don't know if they're improving enough.
I just want to know what the plan is here. I don't
Geyser plan.
Yeah, I don't see a plan.
Neither do I. I think part of the issue is when you look at the top of the lineup where you would really need to improve, you've got guys long term. And I guess you could improve the bottom 6 a little bit for sure, actually looking at it, but there's not a ton of cap space. Like currently they have a lot of cap space, but we're expecting a lot of that to go to Seider and Raymond.
Like, let me read off the defense. So Seider, contract not done, but he'll be there. Then we got Sherratt, Hull, Mata, Petrie, Gustafsson, Simon Edvinsson. That's 7 names I just read off.
Yep.
Why do you need Gustafsson? Or better yet, why did you need one of those guys last offseason?
Well, yeah. So I think the issue is Justin Hull has been a hole.
Yeah. Sherratt's
not that great.
And then you got Petrie as well.
Petrie was actually okay last year.
But again, the logic of adding another body back there.
Yep. And Mata's been fine as like a bottom pair.
So,
but it's, again, an abundance of defensemen that you don't need.
A very average to below average to bad defenseman.
Yeah.
Blocking
Edmondson.
A prospect.
Yeah.
Who's probably better than just about everyone except Seider. Oh, and part of the things they did on defense I don't even know why. Is they paid San Jose to take Jake Waltman, who's been up and down performance-wise, but he wasn't on a bad contract. They gave up a second-round pick to get rid of his very reasonable contract that I think a lot of other teams would have actually paid them for.
Well, they traded a fairly decent defensive prospect, Andrew Gibson, to Nashville for that second-round pick to then attach to Walman to send to San Jose. So not only they were traded for each other, but I where I'm trying to get with this is it's not even just a second. It speaks to that issue of blocking your prospects. Of you have a decent defensive prospect here that instead of potentially developing him and bringing him up into the NHL, you are turning him into a draft pick so you can then use that value to get rid of a player who you shouldn't really have to attach value to.
And maybe shouldn't even be getting rid of to begin with. That's a different debate, but like...
Yeah, I think he had a down year, but I also think the usage he was thrown into was a lot tougher, and he was probably just playing too high in the lineup.
I would have chosen any of the other names outside of maybe Ole Mata that I had read off to attach a second-round pick to get rid of.
Absolutely.
Instead.
Yeah, so I fully agree. I don't know what the plan is, really.
And they still haven't... So the cap space went to Tarasenko, basically. And they still
yeah.
And they still have...
because Seider and Raymond are going to be...
Well, yes.
Almost... Potentially... So I think Puckpedia has like 19.9.
Just under 20. Yeah.
A majority of that is going to most likely go to Seider and Raymond.
Oh, yeah.
Unless they go short term with one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Which
it is. But at the same point, like...
But, well, no, so that does speak to the Walman money going to Tarasenko.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So,
which maybe, I guess... I think you could justify moving out defenseman money to bring in Tarasenko. It's just, was that the right defenseman?
Basically, if you want to make a trade out of it, a second and Walman for Tarasenko, I guess that doesn't sound as bad, but
it's not great.
But it's not great. I don't think you would have gotten quite Tarasenko level, but you probably could have gotten something forward. Probably a third line forward, maybe straight up for Walman, maybe.
Yeah, I think in general, if you're attaching a prospect just to free the cap space for Tarasenko, attach it to a different defenseman, like you said.
Correct. So Ben Sherratt would have been exactly Tarasenko.
Yeah, that's what they should have done.
Correct.
But he's a leader in the locker room. Believe he wears an A, or he did at one point.
And he has he has some trade protection, but again, I don't see the plan.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know where the improvement is going to come from.
And this is a team that overachieved analytically.
Yes.
So their expected goals and other important like on ice metrics were not strong enough. They did not correlate to where they finished in the standings. Basically, so there's probably going to be regression there. So
yeah,
a couple more teams to I guess maybe touch on quickly. Ottawa, real quick?
So I don't think there's a whole lot left this offseason with Ottawa. They moved out Korpisalo and managed to bring in a number one goaltender. So that's a win. The Chychrun trade, I don't know if they necessarily got better, but honestly, Chychrun wasn't that good for Ottawa. So that's fine. You get something for him because he wasn't staying there. Matthew Joseph he really went downhill. So moved his money out. That's fine. Helps you be able to sign Shane Pinto. Okay. You brought in David Perron, Michael Amadio. Those are fine additions. I don't know. We'll see if the big thing that they're really banking on is growth from their younger players, and they now have Linus Ullmark.
Yeah. So is that going to take them from one of the worst teams in the league to a playoff team? So why I wanted to include them in they still have work to do is because they haven't. Ullmark is not making up the difference from. Like, it's not enough of an improvement.
So
behind the same, basically, roster.
Yeah.
The defense is fine, but there needed to be probably an addition there.
Yeah.
They probably need a little bit more two-way forward play somewhere in their lineup.
Which they might get with, like, Amadio on a third line.
So it could be it's really the blue line. Like it was a level of contention last year with how good it was or not good it was, and now you've basically subtracted both Brandstrom and Chychrun, brought in Jensen, and then now you're putting Ullmark in goal and hoping he's as good behind this team as he was behind that Boston Bruins team, and that just seems like a pipe dream.
Yeah. Probably unlikely.
So I would like to see them do something else to solidify themselves, but I don't know what. I don't know what it is, but it should be really a tweaking their blue line a little bit more, but I don't know how they accomplish that.
Yeah. Boston, sure.
They need to get Swayman done.
That's really it.
They need a Swayman contract.
They could use a depth
forward,
bottom six forward, really. So maybe it's Van Riemsdyk comes back. Yeah. I don't know, but that and Swayman gets done. Yeah.
I think that leaves us Carolina and Buffalo, who we had left towards the end of the episode because we kind of were thinking about Carolina, we were kind of waiting to see what happens a little bit. So still Martin Necas and Seth Jarvis that they need to get done. They've done really well with a lot of other contracts, but those need to get done, and it's not a guarantee that Necas is back.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of smoke around that name, but Carolina now might need him back after kind of losing Gensel in particular.
And ultimately waiting too long and letting free agency pass.
So they've done well with the moves they've made, but their two biggest moves, so they have about $14 million in cap space. That could get Necas and Jarvis done, but it's not probably long-term deals for both, which is probably not an optimal outcome. It would be close. It would be very close.
Yeah.
So they might be able to pull it off. They might, but that also would mean Necas would agree to a long-term contract, and it seems like he's ready to kind of move on.
Yep.
Which leaves us Buffalo, who we've debated whether to try to squeeze into this episode or do a full episode on. I think we'll again do a quick little bite here and then do a slightly longer episode because there's really a question to me about just what type of team they want to be. That's the longer discussion episode.
Hits.
Speed.
And hits.
Maybe. But that wasn't what they wanted to be the year, but like.
Well, that's in most of the press conferences this offseason.
So that's where the longer episode we can get in to. So I think what they've done thus far has been about as good as they could have done.
Yeah.
I don't love giving up Matt Savoy for Ryan McLeod, but I think it was the necessary evil.
So I will say with that trade, a lot of people I think reacted in that way of like, wait a minute, we gave up Savoy for a 3C. I don't think people understand what a 3C costs.
Yeah.
A good 3C. So
and add the fact that he's cost controlled, younger, and did not have trade protection.
Yeah. So like I think there was a not very big disconnect, but there was a disconnect with fans of like how much a 3C costs. And by I guess all metrics a good 3C, young, cost controlled RFA when the contract's over. No trade protection.
Yeah.
So I was fine with that. Earlier in the episode, when we were talking about Winnipeg and Nate Schmidt, do you remember what you said?
What are they going to use the buyout money for? Yes, that's still the big issue with the Sabres.
And Jeff Skinner. Yep.
Yep.
So there's deals that need to get done still, so probably got 6 to 7, and Skinner's first year of savings was $7.5 million.
Yeah.
So pretty much, if no one else is added to this roster, you are going into the season with Jeff Skinner's savings.
Yep.
And the need for a top 6 scoring winger.
Correct. In theory, the $6 million also should be your kind of cap asset allocation for a top 6 winger. So,
well, I guess when I finished that sentence right there, I was kind of hinting at
you don't expect more.
Well, no, I was more hinting at you just bought out potentially a top 6 scoring winger. So, we'll see. We'll see. We can go much more in depth with Buffalo, but there should be a move still out there.
Correct. And the point you brought up so why I think they've done relatively actually okay so far is the point you've brought up earlier this episode is, well, who realistically would have they gotten that's kind of already went?
So,
and the answer is really no one.
Yeah, and all of the moves that they've made, I think I've honestly been a fan of all of them, assuming the player gets slotted into the right role. The only one that I didn't love was Malenstein because I think that was a very rich price to pay.
Correct. It's not so much the player; it's the price. It's the price for the player for me.
Yes, and so like. I guess to run through quick what they did do. Zucker, good player. If he's the top 6 guy, I think for some teams that would work. For Buffalo, I don't know if it's enough for what they need.
He should ideally be their third line that's insurance in case of injury.
Yes.
In a top 6.
Yep.
That's what he should be.
And then so
or insurance for like Zach Benson not taking the step forward, but that's a different discussion.
We talked about McLeod, good 3C. They signed Lafferty, Aube-Kubel, good for the 4th line. Reimer, I think that's fine if he's your 3rd goalie. I wonder if there is any chance Levi's starting in Rochester. We'll see. I think they needed a capable 3rd goalie, though, so he's in the organization now. Bryson was brought back. They signed Dennis Gilbert. There's your kind of 7 and 8 defensemen as of right now. I would have liked to have seen some type of move on defense. Really an upgrade from Henry Jokiharju. He was brought back, or at least signed to a contract, so it appears like they will be bringing him back. So defensively, it's Byram, Dahlin, Power, Jokiharju, Samuelson, Clifton. Not necessarily the pairs, but that's your 6. So I don't know. We'll see. They definitely made quality additions. It's just, is it enough?
Yeah.
Not sure.
So they definitely need some level of top 6 addition.
Yep.
I don't know what trade it is, but I do wonder a little bit. You mentioned, like, is there something like what their defense is? It's pretty stagnant. Is there like a Matthias Samuelson goes out in a trade potentially for someone? Then they probably need another defenseman. But yes, there's the potential for another move or two. There should be. But again, I think with what's transpired so far this offseason, I can't knock them too much.
So I agree, and I think where you can still have a little bit of angst, I guess, against the Sabres is, yeah, nothing's really happened, but you also didn't do anything last offseason when you should have. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, well, that top 6 player you're looking to trade for hasn't really been traded yet. That's an important factor here. But I think it is warranted to kind of be critical and say, well, this is really your second year of, like, your team was ready to move forward. Let's make that move to move them forward.
I think that's a great stopping, because I think that would be its whole episode. That's where I talked about identity and stuff like that. So I think we've hit every team over the past 2 episodes. Apologies if you've listened both of these episodes I believe both are going to run about an hour and a half, and we didn't hit on your team at all. If that happened, give us an at so we can talk about. I think Anaheim, maybe we haven't, but they just haven't done anything.
Zegras may be traded. Vetrano may be traded. Going to try and trade Gibson, and no one wants him.
There's Anaheim. So there. I think that now covers everyone. But yeah, if you have listened and we've missed your team and you want to hear some thoughts, we are looking for. We happy to do some suggestions. We got a suggestion on the Rangers. Maybe we'll look at doing a longer episode on them at some point. I would be interested. We did get into the Rangers for a good chunk this episode, but yeah, if you have a team or a situation you want us to dive a little bit more into, at AFP Analytics on X, and we'll be looking for those, because we're gonna record all off season and hope to get you some content. So that we appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.